That last race left me with a strange mix of excitement and frustration that only this sport can truly deliver. You watch everything unfold, you feel like you have a solid read on how the day is going, and then suddenly the whole picture flips upside down in a matter of seconds. What really got me this time is that there are not just one, but two stories coming out of it. Two moments, two very different perspectives, and honestly, two conversations that are going to have fans talking for the entire week ahead. What happened out there did not just shake up the race results. It might actually say something much deeper about where certain drivers are right now, mentally, competitively, and in terms of where they are headed as the season continues to unfold. Let us get straight into the first story. And this one genuinely hurt to watch if you were paying close attention to how the race was playing out. We are talking about Carson Hocevar and what should have been one of his strongest performances at Martinsville Speedway during the Cookout 400. Hocevar started from 7th position, stayed competitive throughout the entire day, and for most of that race, his number 77 Spire Motorsports Chevrolet had legitimate top 15 speed, honestly even better than that at certain points. You could see it clearly. The car was planted, it was consistent, and he was executing everything correctly. Then came the late restart, and that is exactly where everything went completely wrong. Bubba Wallace, driving the number 23 for 23/16 Racing, got into the back of Hocevar coming out of turn 4. And it was not just a light tap either, it was forceful enough to completely spin him around. At Martinsville, once one car goes sideways, it becomes absolute chaos almost instantly. 12 cars ended up getting collected in that wreck. 12. That is the kind of crash that does not just ruin your afternoon. It reshuffles the entire race and changes the outcome for a whole group of drivers at once. Hocevar said it plainly after the race was over, that his team simply got run over out there. And honestly, watching the replay, that is exactly what it looked like from every angle. He also mentioned how an earlier debris caution had already disrupted his team's strategy, and then this incident just piled directly on top of all of that. What really stood out to me, though, was the maturity in how he handled it afterward. Because instead of just going off about the incident and pointing fingers, he actually took a moment to talk about the speed and capability of his race car. He said he was proud of what his number 77 team brought to the track that weekend, and you could genuinely feel that this was not some kind of fluke run. They had something real and legitimate going. Even after all the damage they repaired during that caution, the car kept him on the lead lap, and he fought his way back to finish 17th, which actually ties his career best result at Martinsville Speedway. That finish says a great deal about both the driver and the team behind him. Now, on the other side of this story, Bubba Wallace did not hide from what happened. He admitted openly that it was a misjudgment on his part. He explained that the 3-wide situation going into turn 1 had already gotten him frustrated, and then he simply overdrove the corner trying to make something happen. If you have watched Martinsville long enough, you know that is exactly how things go. Sometimes on that particular track, tight racing heats up tempers, and one small mistake from anyone transforms immediately into a massive wreck that takes out a dozen cars. But here is where it really starts to matter on a much bigger level. Wallace came into that race sitting 3rd in the overall standings. After this crash, he dropped all the way down to 11th. That is not a minor setback by any measure. That is a serious momentum killer at a critical point in the season. And when you combine that drop with multiple cautions already having disrupted the race rhythm throughout the day, that late crash basically rewrote the outcome for a whole group of drivers, not just these two. And we absolutely cannot ignore the fact that Chase Elliott ended up taking the win quietly, but very effectively, capitalizing on all of that late race chaos. Hocevar moves forward from Martinsville, staying positive, even talking about getting a week off before heading to run the truck at Rockingham Speedway and then jumping back into his Cup car at Bristol Motor Speedway. But for Bubba, that is where the second story really kicks into gear, because now the conversation is not just about the wreck itself. It is about how he responds to it and handles the fallout going forward. Veterans started speaking up publicly, and when guys like Rick Mast and Kevin Harvick begin weighing in on a situation, you know people across the sport are genuinely paying attention. Rick Mast brought up something particularly interesting when he pointed directly to Dale Earnhardt Sr., and not for reasons of aggression either, but specifically for mindset and mental approach. He talked about how Earnhardt was cerebral, calculated, and genuinely smart about when to push and when to hold back. In today's points system, that quality matters more than perhaps it ever has before. It is not simply about going for the win on every single restart. It is about finishing races consistently, stacking up points week after week, and maintaining a strong position throughout the long grind of a season. His message was clear and direct, that Bubba needs to get his mind right in those critical pressure moments before they start defining his season negatively. Kevin Harvick then added important context by explaining that Bubba got riled up after being put 3 wide by Hocevar on that restart, which put him in a genuinely difficult and uncomfortable position on the track. Harvick did not sugarcoat any of it, basically saying that emotions got the better of Wallace in that moment. But he also kept things balanced and real, admitting openly that he has done the exact same thing at Martinsville himself, lost his temper, and made moves he probably should not have made. And that right there is precisely why this conversation becomes so interesting and valuable, because it is not really about assigning blame to anyone. It is about growth, learning, and development as a competitor. When you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, this is where it hits the hardest. Not long ago, the conversation was about Bubba Wallace and his teammate Tyler Reddick sitting 1 and 2 in the championship standings. Now, Bubba is sitting 11th. That is how rapidly and dramatically things can change in this sport when one moment goes wrong at the wrong time. With the Cup Series heading to Bristol Motor Speedway next, another short track and another absolute pressure cooker of a venue, this situation could not be arriving at a more critical point in time. If there is one place that will immediately test your patience and decision-making all over again, it is Bristol. So, when you look at both of these stories together, this is not just about one wreck at one race. It is about momentum. It is about composure under pressure. And it is about how drivers respond when things do not go their way at all. Hocevar walks out of Martinsville with genuine confidence in his car and his team, even after getting caught up in someone else's mistake through no fault of his own. Bubba Wallace walks out of it with serious questions surrounding him, not about raw speed, but about control, decision-making, and how he responds before this starts to become a recognizable pattern. Here is where I land personally on all of this. This is one of those moments where it is honestly a little bit of both things at once. If you have watched Martinsville Speedway long enough, you already know that this track tests your patience and composure like virtually no other place on the schedule. Tight corners, heavy braking zones, constant contact throughout the entire race. It is built specifically for tempers to boil over eventually. When you are put 3 wide on a restart like he was, almost anyone can get heated and reactive in that moment. But at the same time, this is the Cup Series. This is where the very best competitors in the sport race every week, and those are precisely the situations where maintaining control separates the good drivers from the championship-level ones. That is where Bubba crossed the line just slightly, not in a dirty way, not with any malicious intent, but in a composure sense. Because when you examine the bigger picture clearly, he was running 3rd in the championship standings before this race weekend. You simply cannot allow one moment of frustration to turn into a mistake that drops you to 11th in the standings and takes your team out of a strong points position when the season is building toward its most important stretch. That is exactly why experienced voices like Kevin Harvick and Rick Mast referenced Dale Earnhardt Sr., not because of his famous aggression, but because of his legendary control and his ability to know precisely when to push hard and when to back off strategically. Bubba has the speed. That much is undeniable based on what we have witnessed this season. Him and Tyler Reddick had 23 Osconic Racing right at the very top of the standings early on, and that does not happen by accident. So, this conversation is not about talent at all. It is entirely about execution when the pressure is highest and the stakes matter most. Honestly, I am not down on Bubba after this race. If anything, I am more curious than ever to see exactly how he responds when Bristol comes around, because that track is going to test him again almost immediately. In my view, this was a mistake born from frustration, but it was also a fairly normal Martinsville moment given the circumstances. The real story now is entirely about what happens next. This is the kind of moment that can either wake a driver up and sharpen their focus, or it can start a gradual spiral downward, and there is really very little middle ground between those two outcomes. If he comes into Bristol with a clear head and channels this frustration into renewed focus, then this could actually be the reset he genuinely needs to get back into that top-tier championship conversation. But if that frustration carries over even slightly, Bristol will expose it without any mercy whatsoever, because that place does not forgive mistakes the way some other tracks might. It amplifies and multiplies them. The standings are tight right now, and one more difficult race could suddenly shift the conversation from winning races to simply fighting to stay relevant in the playoff picture entirely. On the other side, you look at Carson Hocevar, and there is something genuinely solid and exciting building with that program. The speed is real, the confidence is clearly growing race by race, and even after getting collected in that mess at Martinsville through absolutely no fault of his own, he still walked away with a solid result and positive momentum heading forward. That is exactly how you build a meaningful season from the middle of the pack upward. The next race is not just another race on the schedule for either of these drivers, it is a response. And that is exactly what makes it worth watching closely from the very first moment that green flag drops.